When I was a kid, immigration to me was about coming to Ellis Island, about learning the history of the United States, maybe where my family had come from. But now, in this time, in this age, it's starting to mean a different thing. Well, hey guys, it's Ashley. And on this episode of Meet Our Neighbors, we're welcoming back Senator Jamie Eldridge. I think it's time that we talk to some of our elected leaders, maybe have a friend or two with him, and find out what's really going on. So let's go meet them. So I would like to welcome back Senator Jamie Eldridge to the show, and this time I think you might have brought a friend with him. So how would you like to introduce yourself, and after that, can you introduce your friend?
Absolutely. Well, Ashley, thank you for having me on the show. I know the last time you did this interview in my State House office, so great to be here at Wayland Cable. And my name is Jamie Eldridge. I'm the state senator for the Middlesex and Worcester district, which includes Wayland. And I have my very good friend, we're just discussing if it was 17 years or 18 years or longer, Antonio Massa, a longtime friend who's just been an incredible advocate for immigrants, and particularly during his time as an immigration attorney located in Southborough. Antonio has been taking on the cases of a number of the immigrants who have been detained. And I think it's important to emphasize is not many immigration attorneys take on detention cases. They mostly do the sort of high-end professional immigration law cases. So I have incredible respect for what he's doing. And when I'm getting calls from my constituents who've been arrested by ICE this year under the Trump administration, Antonio is one of my go-to persons to take cases, and almost to a case he's taken those cases. They're very difficult cases, often not very well paying, so have a tremendous amount of respect for his values, his commitment to helping people, and as a Brazilian immigrant, his commitment to helping his fellow Brazilian immigrants.
That's quite an introduction.
That is amazing, Jamie. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Ashley.
Well, thank you. I would assume you're very busy.
It's been very hectic, certainly. I mean, I think it's, we've struggled in our office to find the right balance. And at times, since February, we've kind of like decided, okay, let's set a limit on how many cases we're going to take. Maybe we just take 3 detainees at a time. And then that number went up to 5, and then it came back, right? Because we're really trying to figure out, as Jamie said, these cases are incredibly stressful. You find the families at a moment where maybe you took the breadwinner from the family, maybe you took a parent and their small children. So it's a situation where you're really running against time before that person gets a removal order, right? And today we're at a point where we decided we're not really putting limits on how many cases we take, but we are actually looking at each case, analyzing each case as they come in to try to decide whether we really can be effective on them. But it's been very stressful, for sure.
Well, Senator, I would imagine your phone is ringing a lot. What are you hearing?
Yes, it is, and be the first to say, obviously I have all the privilege in the world as a legislator and sometimes a U.S. citizen, et cetera. But I will say, as a legislator, I think because I've been so active advocating for immigrants my entire career, and that includes, the driver's license law that passed, in-state tuition for undocumented immigrants, and then just, attending a lot of immigrant events, is that it's definitely very stressful as well. I would say probably every 2 days I get a message from someone that's been arrested in my district, or because of some of my advocacy, someone that knew a family member who was one of the Martha's Vineyard immigrants who was arrested last week, saying, I need help, whether it's getting connected to an attorney, whether it's financial support, because obviously that means that a spouse or parent is suddenly, not working, and so the survivors, if you will, are trying to figure out, how to survive financially, to getting, a message on Instagram of some video that I can't 100% confirm, but looks like ICE is arresting someone or targeting someone, outside of an apartment building. So it is pretty intense, and I think trying to manage a little bit to what Antonio just referenced is how do you manage, these cases? And I'm lucky enough to have a staff that works on a lot of these cases, but it does sort of interrupt the normal flow of work, including looking to pass more legislation like the Safe Communities Act that would sort of create a bright line between local and state law enforcement and ICE agents.
Yeah, if I may,
Sure.
I just wanted to, because it's incredible. Yesterday I was just having a conversation with my wife about your legislation, right? To make sure that everybody had driver's licenses, irrespective of undocumented, of immigration status. And the reality is that legislation today is incredibly helpful because a lot of times people are going into court for these driving without a license, these motor vehicle violations, right? And in court today, a lot of the people who go in, they come into contact with ICE and then get detained. In fact, I had a client who went into court because she was pursuing a restraining order against an abusive partner, and then ICE detained her. And this is a person who has a pending U visa application. So this is somebody who's actually seeking legal status and is in a process, right?
And
But
seeking help from the court for protection.
and seeking
of the
help from the
Yeah.
exactly for protection, right? So then you put somebody in that context, and that person is detained. So can you imagine now if we did not have the driving without a license, the driver's license bill or law, right? So I mean, I want to commend you for that. So.
No, thank you. And I think it lifts up, one of my main points is that the sort of mass deportation agenda, agenda of the Trump administration is harmful for public safety. First of all, with respect to immigrant communities, it's causing a loss of trust with law enforcement that when there are, real crimes happening in a community, someone's not going to report them. As well as the fact that, I'm getting a lot of reports that now it's not just ICE agents in the streets, it's DEA, it's FBI, it's the administration is pulling in any federal agent. And that means that the white collar crimes, the fraud cases, the serious gang unit crimes are not being investigated because all those resources are being directed to targeting undocumented immigrants, the vast majority of whom have committed no crime.
So they're being deputized from other agencies to act as an ICE agent in those capacities.
Yes, and they don't even, as much as I'm critical of a lot of the ICE agent tactics, they don't even have the basic knowledge of often of immigration law, and yet they're out there pulling people out of their cars or targeting apartment buildings.
I'm really glad you said that about immigration law because someone may be watching this. What rights does someone have who might not be a citizen?
Well, the Constitution affords rights to all of us here, whether you're lawfully in a country or you don't have legal immigration status, right? So if you've lived here, and people many times will say, well, but if you have no legal immigration status, how can the Constitution protect you? And I always go to an example which is fairly simple to understand, and is suppose that you have a community of people that have no status, and now the government wants to impose a religion on that community, right? Because that's very clear, right? Of course, the government cannot just say, you're going to practice this or that religion, right? And it's the same thing with the Fourth Amendment, and it's the same thing with the Fifth Amendment, right? People have the right to be protected within their homes. People have a right to due process. You cannot simply pick up somebody off the streets, put them on a plane, and send them away without being able to let that person offer a defense for their removal, right? And immigration law provides for that also. Immigration law also provides guidelines for people who are here to actually be able to defend themselves if they are placed in removal proceedings, or if they are detained, to be able to pursue what is called a bond, which is the equivalent of bail in criminal court, right? Meaning that they would pay a certain amount onto the government to be able to be released, so long as they can show that they are not a risk of flight or a risk of safety.
So hold on just a second. We've got the Constitution that will be the umbrella under which we all fall under, that gives protection for all of us.
Yep.
And then underneath that umbrella is immigration law. So we have two separate entities that are protecting individuals?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
And two sets of rules, right? And immigration law, of course, also takes some rights away. And you see that the administration is definitely expanding on what they can right? For instance, we have something in immigration law called the expedited removal process for people who are found close to the border, cannot show that they've been here for over 2 years, right? So they can actually institute expedited removal against those persons without actually putting them before a judge. And that's what the law says. And, you know, due process there, right? Congress decided that due process there doesn't apply as much because these people just arrived. But that's not the case for somebody like I had a client who's been here for 25 years, working, paying taxes, no criminal charges whatsoever, who was picked up, detained, and even denied what is called voluntary departure, which is when you're telling the government, okay, I will leave by myself without you having to remove me, right? So unfortunately, what we've been seeing more and more, I was speaking to another attorney this morning who was telling me that they had filed a habeas in court, and then ICE moved the client to another jurisdiction, and then after the client was moved, right, I said, well, we already moved the person. The habeas basically was to hold the person in the district here, right? Because that's another tactic that the government is using. They're basically moving people out of the jurisdiction their attorneys are, their families are, because then it also makes things harder for them, right? If you get somebody that is detained in Massachusetts and you now move that person to Texas, you're removing them from counsel, you're removing them from their immediate family. You know, obviously you're going to make the process harder for that person.
Well, as a legislator, how in the world can you do anything, first of all? Because if they're moving folks from Massachusetts to Texas, how can you help? And how are you viewing this as something that we can even affect?
Yeah, and certainly there aren't a whole lot of things that state legislators can do as far as passing legislation. Certainly we need to speak up and I think highlight, referring a little bit to what Antonio talked about, is this due process. Is remember, everyone gets due process, you know, and therefore it's not just about, you know, whether you are a violent criminal, everyone gets due process, right? That's what due process is. And so when I see online people saying these individuals don't deserve due process, you know, I try to ask them, well, you know, we all at one time or another make some mistake in our life. Do you want this situation to exacerbate so that nobody has due process, including American citizens? But as far as what state legislators can do, and you mentioned, you know, people being transferred to other states, is that was sort of my first case under the Trump administration, where a husband, father, business owner, Lucas Amaral out of Marlboro, as far as I can tell, he was racially profiled by ICE, which was doing sort of a spot check in a neighborhood in Marlboro where there's a large Latino population, pulled over, was brought to Plymouth County Jail for a couple days, but then, contrary to what happened, at least under the Biden administration, was sent to Texas ICE facility. And so I worked hard to connect him to another great attorney that Antonio knows well, Eloa Celadon, and she was able to represent him and get him, after about, I think, a month or so, out of the Texas facility back with his family. But yeah, it was a very moving process. They came to the State House, and the wife talked about their experience. So certainly as legislators, and I would say particularly state legislators, we're getting contacted to connect people to, you know, people like Antonio, people like Eloa that are doing the immigration work for those who are detained. And then, of course, there's the state legislation, which really is about creating a bright line between federal ICE agents and what the Trump administration is doing, and state and local law enforcement. Because just so you have a sense, other states, even north of us in New Hampshire, the local and state police are directly collaborating with ICE to deport people, and that's creating an even scarier situation. So we don't have that in Massachusetts, but that's just because of the choice of our state government and our local police. We want to prohibit any collaboration between local police because that will, again, cause that breakdown in trust, and it will, I think, further harm public safety. So there's certainly that legislation, the Safe Communities Act. There's another bill called Dignity Not Deportation. And then in the budget that the House and Senate just passed, and I credit the House for doing this, they put in $5 million, what's called the Immigrant Defense Act, which would pay attorneys, including for attorneys like Antonio from indigent clients who get detained due to their legal status, to pay them for their work. So that's something that the state can do to sort of provide that funding when, of course, we know the federal government's not going to do that.
It would seem to me that the governor has some things on her plate too. Are there things that she could do that could affect things at all?
One thing that an amazing organization called LUCE, which actually trains people to observe ICE agents, just to sort of so you have a sense exactly what that is this morning I received text messages that ICE was in Acton, and LUCE, this sort of this state network of trained advocates, sent people there to observe the ICE agents. So they're just standing there observing them, but the hope is that just by observing them, they will be inclined to go away because they don't like being watched and observed. So that happened this morning, but I think that what I would like to see the state do is, and this has been requested by LUCE, is the governor could allow for virtual hearings at courthouses. To what Antonio mentioned a little bit before, is you have ICE agents going into courts or waiting outside courthouses and arresting people who are undocumented. So imagine if more of those hearings were virtual, that would significantly reduce, in my opinion, some of these arrests. So that's been asked of Governor Healy. And I think what I have said and been pretty public about it beginning today is, Governor Healy needs to make a point that being undocumented does not mean you're a criminal. And what's really happened, in my opinion, from sort of a racial ethnic discrimination point of view, is the criminalization of being an immigrant, right? It's all by design by the right wing, is that if you call immigrants who don't have legal status criminals long enough, unfortunately, a larger percentage of the general public will say, oh yeah, you're undocumented, you're a criminal. Yeah. So we need Governor Healy to make clear that that's not the case, and not just talk about due process, but to say, no, the vast majority of undocumented immigrants, those who haven't committed crime, paid taxes, given back to their community, they shouldn't be arrested at all. We need to wait for a national path to citizenship for those individuals.
Well, the three of us could walk into a room, and until maybe you begin to speak, we might all be considered to have a certain privilege, and even then, we still have that privilege regardless of whether or not you speak because of the color of our skin.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people that I know that their children are saying, are you going to be arrested and detained?
Yep. Because
they don't have that privilege. That has to be very weighing on you.
I mean, well, my privilege, because I don't think they're looking for people in suits, right? So, unfortunately, there is a lot of profiling, right? There's a ton of profiling.
Yeah.
I mean, ICE is basically stopping people on their way to work in the morning, because they're brown and they're driving construction vans.
Absolutely.
Right? So those are warrantless arrests. They just
that
basically
is racially profiling.
that is right
there. That is the basic definition.
So and that's happening, and that really is, I think, like one of the big issues, right, that we're dealing with that we haven't dealt with before, is this. There's no sense of when it's going to happen or to whom it's going to happen. So everybody's locked in their homes now, scared. And some people out there may say, well, but people shouldn't put themselves in that position. They're here, without legal status, so they get what they deserve. And you said one thing back then, and I kept thinking about that, because you said, well, people make mistakes, right? I mean, there are tax amnesties, right, for people who fail to pay their taxes.
Oh yes.
Sometimes you are speeding on the road and you go in and you pay your fine, and they allow you to get back. And even if you get 3 fines, you get to do your schooling, and then they will send you back on the road. And one of the big issues with immigration law that people don't understand is that the system today, once you've overstayed your visa, once you came here and you have no status, it's very difficult for you to go back into status. There are very, 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 very slim channels for you to get back that status, right?
Yep.
So I hear a lot of people saying, well, people should go back to the countries and get to the back of the line. Well, there's no line.
There's no line, exactly.
There's no line.
Yep.
Because our immigration laws, unfortunately, right, will penalize you in ways that, I mean, I have several families of people who've been here for 20, 30 years. They've married, they have kids, they've built businesses,
So their
right,
kids
bought
are
their homes.
United States citizens.
United States citizens, their spouses are United States citizens, and they cannot get legal status. And I'm not kidding. This is like a reality that I deal with every day. You know, this is like in the office, I have 5 people on the phones triaging possible cases, of which, you know, we'll probably bring in maybe a quarter of those people for consultations, because a lot of them, right away, we can tell that there's nothing we can do because of the way the law is set up. And people need to understand that. People need to understand that it's not a matter of like, I'm unlawful or I'm not unlawful, and let's just make sure that we kick everybody out because people don't want to get status. That's not the case at all. I mean, my own story, it took me 32 years to become a U.S. citizen. This is crazy when you think about
32 years,
that.
yeah.
32 years.
So in
Look
between
at that journey.
Year 1 and right up to the date before, you could have been picked up by ICE.
I could have been picked up by ICE. In fact, I became a lawyer and I had no status.
Wow.
The first lawyer who was undocumented to become a lawyer. Yep.
So that's how crazy our system is, you know, and people don't realize that, right? So I think we need to, and I get it, right? I get that some people, they have a very black and white view of the world, and I'm not going to criticize people here and like say, well, you know, they broke the law, they should pay for it somehow. Yeah, let's make people get right by the law, but let's engage in a conversation about what is right. What is right? You know, is it right for a mother who's been here for 20 plus years, have U.S. citizen children, have paid their taxes, maybe owns a business, employs American citizens? I have so many of those clients, right? Is it right for us now to say to that person, leave? After we've benefited from her work, also from her labor for over 25 years, right? Or is it more in line with our ideals as Americans, right? To say, you know what? Okay, there's a problem here. How do we fix it? And how do we make this person, you know, make up for this issue, which is the right the lack of status? But how do we get her in a pathway to citizenship? Citizenship, which she probably, in soul, in mind, right, already has.
Yeah,
but not
as American,
right? As American
yeah,
person,
exactly.
right? So, and we've been struggling with that question for what? Over 20 years. I mean, look at the DACA debate about these kids who came here when they were 2, 3, 4-year-olds, right? And still, they have no status. I mean, I came here when I was 12, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well, it is ironic that someone could be considered common law married if they're together for a certain amount of time. But then if you're in the country for any amount of time, 32 almost years, you're not common law married to the United States at all.
Yeah, and there's so many mixed status families. You know, I hear from a lot where the husband or wife has gained status, but the spouse, despite marriage, cannot get that status. Yeah, because of the way that person came in, or because of a certain order against that person.
Well, I've heard that there's a fair amount of thought that it's all related to gangs. And tattoos, and there's a lot of information that may or may not be true with that. So,
And being sent to foreign prisons, which imagine that, people on this American soil being sent to foreign prisons. Yep, did not think we would get to that.
no,
Yep.
and especially considering, from what I know, the Venezuelan gangs aren't exactly known for their tattoos.
Exactly.
So what information would you like to share about all of this, from gangs to families to your constituents who may be incredibly fearful to even call you and say, I need help?
Well, for those that have, perhaps more hardline views on immigration, I mean, I just really think they need to think about in their community, who is often doing, a lot of the work that those who have been longtime U.S. citizens won't. And really, are those immigrants people that do people really think a large percentage of those individuals are gangs? I mean, it's just unbelievably absurd. So really trying to process when there is that, propaganda that, I think there was a press conference by the U.S. Attorney's Office this morning saying, all of these arrests were people that had violent criminal records. My guess, it was very, very few compared to all the arrests that are happening in Massachusetts. So I think that's, that's something to think about. And I think, beyond that, I think it's, what are the rest of us doing, organizing, whether advocating for legislation, being observers when ICE is in our community, and reiterating the message of how much immigrants contribute to Massachusetts. And let's remember, we're in a state that has a massive workforce crisis, and is the fastest growing demographic are senior citizens. So, what are we doing if we're sending away so many young people and so many immigrants out of this state?
The question I have is, does advocacy really do anything? This is really for both of you. Or is it what we do when something happens and then we go back to our jobs and we feel like we've made a change and maybe we haven't? Does it do anything?
We should talk about the driver's license campaign.
Yep, the driver's license campaign was an example of how that worked, right? Yeah. And it took time. It took many years. I mean, obviously once the bill was introduced, there was like a big movement, especially within immigrant communities also, to be able to get the message out.
Yeah, 20 years.
Right? 20 years.
Yep.
It's a long time to be patient.
It is a long time to be patient.
Yeah. But that effort, which passed in 2022, is that, the advocacy both by immigrants and to their credit, a lot of labor unions did a lot of great work on it, is it passed the legislature. And then the opponents of it went to the ballot to try to repeal it. And quite honestly, I don't think we thought we would win, but we told the stories of immigrants contributing, that this was about public safety, particularly safety on the road for everyone to have a driver's license. Yep. We had police chiefs, on TV commercials speak out about it, and we won the campaign at the ballot, which I did not expect we would pass. But I think it did speak to telling people's stories. So I would say, with respect to the legislation that I filed, which I will say we're approaching 20 years of that bill, because it's been filed since the Obama administration, actually, is that the bill has passed the Senate before, so it has gained the support of senators before. So, the bill is back pending in committee, because every time there's a new legislative session, all bills sort of restart. But we're trying to pass that bill, as well as the dignity, not deportation, to prevent local police, state police from signing agreements with ICE agents that deputize them as immigration agents. So we're looking to pass that legislation as well.
Yeah, I do think that advocacy is so important. And I do feel that right now people are very quiet. In fact, I was surprised by the protest yesterday in Milford, because it was the first time that I saw people coming out really and saying, okay, you know what, this is, ICE crossed the red line here.
Exactly.
Right. And I think we need more of that, because honestly, when we talk about those personal stories, right, when we really put the information out there and tell people exactly what is going on, like if I tell people that people are actually going to immigration court today to be able to go before a judge and have their cases heard, and then when they leave, ICE is picking them up at the door when they leave, or when I tell you that people are going in with their spouses maybe to immigration to pursue a benefit and then leaving and getting arrested. I mean, this is happening around the country, right? When you start telling those stories, then people realize that this is not, as the administration's been saying, oh, we're targeting criminal aliens, right? And they use this, right, the language that dehumanizes people. Although, to your point before, and I think it's important to emphasize, even people who've committed crimes or been charged with crimes have a right to defend themselves. And going back to the stuff with the tattoos and the Venezuelans, right? When the government put 250 people on a plane and sent them out to El Salvador in the middle of the night, disregarding a federal court order that said nobody should be flown out of the country, right? I mean, when we start thinking about putting everything into context, listen, guys, whether you support this administration or not, right? We as Americans value our Constitution, right? We talk about that all the time, irrespective of party.
Right, our freedoms, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we cannot turn on and turn off the Constitution when it's politically convenient for us, right? And that's really what's going on here. So I definitely think speaking out about it is important. That's why I'm here. That's why, it's irrespective of my crazy schedule, I said, no, I got to be there because it's another opportunity for us to be able to say what we need to say and actually hopefully reach out more people and let them know, listen, this is going on. We got to pay attention to this.
What can average, everyday citizens do?
Well, certainly as a legislator is, contacting me to say they support the Safe Communities Act, which I am one of the Senate sponsors of, the Dignity Not Deportation bill. And I think also, which I got a bunch of emails today about the Milford arrest of the teenager, is, Senator Eldridge, what are you doing, to stop ICE mass deportation agenda in Massachusetts? And I do think for more legislators, quite honestly, those that are either in more conservative districts or are more conservative, is to email their legislators to express their outrage, because to Antonio's point about the massive outpouring in Milford, anyone who knows Milford knows that it's a fairly conservative town.
Yep.
It's actually had a little bit of history of being anti-immigrant, even though there's a large Brazilian and I think Ecuadorian populations there. So to have that, outburst of energy showed that, I agree that ICE really crossed the line. There was a rally yesterday in Acton, which I didn't happen to make because there were some arrests in Acton and Boxborough of immigrants, but I spoke at a rally, 2 weeks ago. So showing up at rallies is important, but I do think, to be very specific, it's about advocating for those two bills and asking legislators, including not just state legislators, but local officials, select board members, and then congressmen and women.
Right, and federal legislators too, right?
Yeah.
Congress, because I think that's important also, is to get the message out there that this is not okay and that we're actually paying attention to this, right? Because and in fact, I'm going to put you on the spot, but maybe not as much you, but your federal counterparts, right?
Yeah.
I wish I would hear more from them on this, right? And I think people are incredibly quiet about all the violations of the process that have been going on for the last 3 months. I certainly would like to hear more from our governor on this. I remember seeing when there was an arrest in Worcester that the local police got involved. I'm not sure if you saw those scenes on
My goodness,
they
The
went viral.
neighborhoods came together and said,
Right.
this is not okay.
And they asked the governor, I remember they asked the governor a question about it at a press conference, and she was very, I remember people were like looking at me as like, is she going to say anything about this? And people felt disappointed really about the lack of leadership on this issue, because whether she knew about the details of the case or not, she could definitely have spoken about what you said, about how immigrants today, and for many years, have made our state, our Commonwealth better, right? And I think that message is getting lost because obviously the people who are screaming criminal aliens are very loud right now. And a lot of people are just reluctant to take a risk and actually do what's right. When you talked about the driver's license bill, Senator, you said, listen, I didn't expect that this would pass on the ballot, right? And we actually realized that we didn't have that support. And I think that with immigration, it happens a lot. And so many people were so against that bill for so many years. And it passed, and it has been beneficial to the Commonwealth. And the world hasn't fallen through, right?
It's been very quiet.
Right?
Exactly.
Nothing has changed in anybody's life. It's actually been better because now everybody gets insurance, everybody's registered, everybody goes through the process of obtaining a license. So we shouldn't be afraid of being vocal about what is right. And I think that sometimes we miss that.
If people are afraid, they can still pick up a phone. They can still email. Those are things that we all can do. We're not standing outside at a protest if that's beyond someone's ability to do. They can still make a change. They can still do something to advocate for those who may not have a voice right now.
Yep, absolutely.
Are there stories, are there moments that, Antonio, that you want to get across to our community to frankly humanize the people that are being targeted?
So many, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's you asked that question, right? And I have so many images of people that come through my office, of videos that I constantly get bombarded with. You know, there's nobody in this state, and I am sure about what I'm saying, that doesn't have somebody who's really close and is undocumented. They may not know it.
Right.
Like for many years, people didn't realize that I was undocumented, right? Because I didn't go out there and say, oh yeah, I have no legal status, right? And, you know, so the people sitting on the pews next to church, in church next to you, the people who are sometimes coaching Little League, right? There was a story on the Times last week about this music teacher, right? You know, these people are in our communities. And we need to realize that immigration is a problem that we have been trying to solve for almost 3 decades right now. I mean, it's actually not a problem. Immigration is within the fabric of our nation, right? It has built what it's part of who we are. It makes us America, right? And what's happening today historically is not new, because we've had waves of anti-immigrant sentiment throughout our history, be it in the 19th century, in the middle of the 20th century, right? So we need to learn from our history. We need to kind of like think back and understand that we have, for generations, welcomed people from other places who have made us better. And that is, you know, that's just the truth. Whether you like immigrants or not, that is the truth. And this is not, I will say, it's not really about legal or illegal immigration, okay? It's not about people who have been charged with crimes and not charged with crimes, because if it were, we wouldn't be arresting people outside courtrooms who are going to immigration court to get their status in order, right? In fact, there was just an article that was published about Stephen Miller, who is one of the architects of the mass deportation policy, that he was screaming at ICE officials, at the leadership, because they were trying to arrest people with criminal charges. And they're saying, what do you mean? Why aren't you going to the 7-Elevens and the Home Depots to detain everybody? And why are your numbers so low? And people, well, this is the policy that the government is saying they're pursuing, you know, when in fact it's not, right? In fact, it's not. And we should all be paying attention, right? We should all be paying attention. Listen, you want to get a doses of humanity on this? Go on Instagram and just Google ICE arrests. Watch 10 minutes of the different videos of people out there filming ICE agents, right? Just ask yourself, why are ICE officers masked? What are they hiding? If what they think they're doing, because this is what I ask myself, what are they hiding? If what they think they're doing is moral and is correct, why are they hiding their faces?
Because they're ashamed or they know it's wrong.
So, I mean,
I have to say, years ago, I was a police officer. And I swore to uphold the Constitution, and I swore to protect not just citizens. It was those, it was everyone. So that in particular really touches me. Because we had to have our badge displayed. We had to have our badge number, our name displayed, because people had the right to complain and to know who I was and why I was there. I had to have a right to pull someone over. So all of those things from just your basic law enforcement they are part of the federal law enforcement system too.
Yeah. And I think local law enforcement really do get this. And they're, even talking to a police chief over the weekend, he doesn't want to be seen as, there to target immigrants, but because the ICE agents more often than not wear police, on their vests, or the other federal agents, naturally a lot of people are going to think that it's local police. So it's really creating a blurring the line again that's hurting public safety for everyone.
It does, because if an immigrant is a victim of a crime, they're going to think twice about calling the police and reporting that crime, because they don't want to, get the police involved. At least ICE comes to their door, right?
And that's, to put that into perspective, that's going to be children being abused. That's going to be drug overdoses. That's going to be husbands and wives that are being affected by domestic violence. They're homicide, rape. There are so many things there that folks are not going to feel freedom to call law enforcement. Are there websites or advocacy organizations that we as a community can go to and learn about to help?
Statewide, the LUCE network, so LUCE network, and they're the ones actually are training people, and they'll come to any community to train people to be able to observe ICE and educate people about their rights. I work with the MIRA Coalition, the Mass Immigrant and Refugees Advocacy Coalition, that also does Know Your Rights. So we've been doing a lot of Know Your Rights, like at Brazilian churches and other churches in the district I represent. Certainly, Brazilian Workers Center. Not sure other
Mass
groups.
Legal has an amazing resource online also. Definitely, I was going to cite MIRA too. And obviously, I think, Diego Lowe is also doing a great job.
Metro West Workers Center.
Workers Center in Framingham as it relates to the people who are being detained.
BJAN, Boston Immigrant Justice Action Network, BIJAN.
We're very fortunate that we have an amazing resource of, for advocates and organizations here on the ground. So definitely, there's a lot going on in terms of.
Well, I personally can't even imagine what both of you are experiencing on a daily basis, because you have to put on your professional hat, but then you also don't ever take off your personal hat. So thank you very, very much for speaking out, for having the courage to do it. And I hope that by you speaking out, the rest of us can kind of catch some of that courage too.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
start speaking as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having us on.
Thank you.
In 1883, Emma Lazarus wrote the New Colossus. She wrote it to raise money for the construction of the pedestal for the Statue of Liberty. In 1903, the poem was cast onto a bronze plaque and mounted on the inside of the pedestal's lower level. I think it's apropos to quote the last section of the poem. Keep ancient lands, restore in pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Let us remember the timeless call. An invitation not just to those seeking refuge, but really to all of us, to be the light that welcomes, the hand that lifts, and the voice that defends the dignity of everyone. May we hold fast to the spirit of compassion and inclusivity, ensuring that this golden door remains open. And above all else, may we not ignore those who just want a chance to live free, to have dignity, and to live with a chance to not have fear. Because after all, some of those are the very same reasons why our country was founded in the first place. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share my channel. And who do you think that we should meet next?